I'm really excited you are all here. So, welcome. Thank you for coming. We have a lot of great speakers here tonight that have invested their time to talk about some really interesting subjects. And tonight, we're talking about growth. So, we've had about a dozen Bend 101s starting back just before the pandemic. And we've talked about homelessness, we've talked about wildfire, we've talked about a lot of really interesting subjects, but tonight we're talking about growth and we've got some great people here. Normally we have Kelly Cannon Miller, who's the director of the Deschutes Historical Museum, and she does a presentation with Damon Runberg, who is the state economist for Business Oregon. And Kelly couldn't join us tonight, but we are in the capable hands of Damon. So everyone thank him. He has to be to Portland tomorrow morning, and he's giving us his time tonight.
Thank you, Brian, and it's great to be here. I'm got to shed a little bit of a tear because my partner in crime's not here. Kelly is great, and I'm going to throw a little pitch out for you all. If you've never been to the Deschutes Historical Society, it's downtown. It is not the High Desert Museum, but you should go to the High Desert Museum too if you've never gone there. But definitely go visit the museum downtown. It's great. Kelly is a character, and she has all sorts of phenomenal anecdotes and stories that she tells, as I have all the stuffy economic data that we have. And so you're really missing out. And I'm going to have to tell her that you really, she let this whole crowd down today. But no, it's all right. I'll do my best. There are some pictures she put on the slide deck that I have no idea what the story is behind them. So just letting you know that maybe we'll email you all a few anecdotes of what the heck those pictures were. One of them, in fact, I was squinting super hard and be like, there's got to be something here I could glean from this, but I could not. But today, we're going to start off the conversation getting to know Bend yesterday and today. And like I said, we're gonna go through Bend's history and talk also about the way that people in Bend have made a living through the time that this place has been called Bend. Before that, Farewell Bend. Fun tidbit for you all. We're going to run through sort of a few topics, but I think one of the first ones I want to sit and talk about a bit, and this is pretty washed out now that I'm looking at it a bit, which is good. That way you'll just look at me and not at the slides. Are the people, those of us who have been Bendites over the years. And this is an example of what I have no idea what Kelly's slide was. She has this really cool newspaper clipping here. You could look at those headlines. I don't know what she was trying to say. I think it's the first newspaper clipping after Bend was incorporated as a city. I think that's what it was. So, don't quote me on that. But this is the history of Bend's growth on the left-hand side here. And the blue, which once again, many of you probably can't see because we have this fabulous sunset going on. But the blue line here is Bend's population growth for each decade going back to when Bend was incorporated as a city back in the early 1900s. And you can see, I don't have a laser pointer, but they deprived me of that privilege. But if I could have my laser pointer, I'd show there's this blue line is like off the charts here. Our first decade of growth was insane. We grew from 2 people to 12 people, and the percentage growth was bonkers. So it was more than that. I think we went from roughly the size of my kids' elementary school at Miller down the street to something like a couple thousand, and that is an insane percentage growth over a decade. But it goes to show that Bend's history, short history of just since we've been incorporated as a city, is one of phenomenal growth. If you kind of follow this growth rate through time, you can see we get to the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, and yes, those were periods of growth, but they weren't rip-roaring periods of growth. In fact, you see this one decade there, the 1960s, which was always an era, a period that I had sort of built up in my head as like the peak of the logging industry. Like this was like the heyday of logging. And yet it's one of the slowest decades of growth we have seen in Bend's history. So it seems like a bit of a head scratcher when you kind of look at that decade of growth there. And it turns out, and Kelly has this great story about it, but did I get a laser? Hot dang, look at that. Ask and you shall receive. There's a flashlight too, so I don't know what to do with that necessarily. We'll figure that out later. Okay. So we get this slow period here. It turns out that wasn't the heyday of logging. There was early signs, much earlier than I think many of us realized, that we were sort of overproducing, over-harvesting on the national forest outside of Bend. And in the early 1930s, the Forest Service said basically, like, I think we're cutting too much. Like, we got to chill out on the logging. And the Bend Chamber of Commerce was like, the people hosting this event for us today, said, I don't know about that. We should do our own study to make sure. And the Ben Chamber did their own study in the 1930s, and it revealed the exact same thing, that if we continued to harvest our lodgepole pine at the rate that we were producing, we would eventually run out of marketable wood that we can be producing. And that point at which we ran into that was this decade in the 1950s. And so that sort of this story of overconsumption and sort of realizing, okay, we had all of our eggs in one basket for a long period of time. And there were real economic consequences from that. And it took a long time for Ben to sort of come out of that. We lost one of our large mills. There were two mills down in the old mill district, Shevlin Hickson and Brooks Scanlon. That was a test for you all. Kelly normally does the names. I don't do that. I do the numbers. But as you go through the decades, we start to see a re-energizing of growth rates. And you see particularly when you get to the 1990s and 2000s, holy cow, we start going off the charts again. The decade that was the 90s, so that the decade that ended in 2000, 122% growth in Bend's population in that one decade. So when people are talking about or complaining about the pace of growth that we see now in Bend, just remember, not too long ago, it was much faster than that. In fact, we're on this deceleration path as far as growth goes here in Bend, which is also a narrative I don't think we hear that often. If you could see, it says the 2020 number there is just roughly 30%. So that was the decade of the 20 teens. I don't know what to call that decade yet. Anyone have a good name for the 2010s? Is that what we call it? I ask every audience I speak at, like, what the hell do we call this decade? And no one has a good answer for me. So I'll keep trying. So we had this 30% growth roughly, but then you can see the 2020s. With some older data, we were projecting what the growth rate for the decade of the 2020s would be based on the first 3 years of growth we've seen in Bend. We've got the fourth year, and I haven't actually updated the chart, but I did update in my brain. I remember what the number is. We're tracking for 13% growth for the decade in the 2020s. So go back on this graph here. The last time we saw 13% growth in Bend in a decade, 1950s. Well, the decade of the 1940s, I should say, ended in 1950. This is some of the slowest rates of growth Bend has seen in 30 plus years that we're sitting in right this moment. Once again, not the story you hear that often. In fact, the pandemic was really the catalyst for the slowdown that we've seen. So we were not a Zoom town. We were not like Bozeman, Montana, or some of these other Zoom towns. Not for lack of people wanting to move here, but we had a cap on how many people could move here, and that was the housing availability and the housing costs that were associated with Bend. Oh, I probably should just address the top image because I do know what that's about. The thing that really put Bend, this era of growth here that we see in the very beginning in the 1930s, the decade of the 1920s, was we finally got a railroad that came here, so people could start moving to Bend in mass, and that's what really put Bend on the map was the railroad. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the people and the composition of us, the racial and ethnic diversity. Tell you what, I mean, I'm looking at this audience. We're not doing too great on the ethnic and racial diversity. We probably, though, look exactly like the composition that we are as a community as a whole. 83% white, non-Hispanic, which is way higher than the 58% for the US average. So a very white community. But it's really important to note, too, that this isn't always how it's been. Kelly then goes into a whole thing about our First Nations folks, the Native American tribes that were here. I'm going to do my best and try not to butcher it, okay? But we have a handful of influential tribes that are located around the Bend area that have been here for time immemorial, including the Confederate tribes of the Warm Springs, who are now located to the north of us, but they were all around these lands before we set up reservations. The Klamath and Modoc tribes to our south as well were an influential tribe that frequented this region. And then we have the Burns Paiute tribe to our east as well that was also engaging in our communities. I think I nailed that. Yes. One interesting tidbit. Anyone know what this picture's from? This one's not too washed out. You might know. Anyone? Paulina Peak, yes. East Lake, I think, is what we're looking at. And this is the Obsidian Flow. If you haven't gone before for a hike up into Newberry Crater, it's like the less pretty version of Crater Lake, but there's two lakes, so that's a bonus, right? So, and you could float in it, which Crater Lake's awkward and difficult to get into. So Paulina Newberry Crater. It's an amazing place, but there's obsidian there. And somehow, this is far beyond my knowledge base, they've been able to track that obsidian through carbon whatever and figured out that this exact obsidian from this lava flow had been traded so extensively that they're uncovering arrowheads made of Central Oregon obsidian as far east as the Great Lakes, which is pretty phenomenal. So there was a vast economy that existed in this place before sort of white settlers showed up. And so we're going to kind of go back to the today times a little bit more, but just this idea of transitions in the economy and how people made a living here in Bend. And oftentimes I hear this story or this narrative that Bend is, was a timber town that turned into a tourism town. And anyone hear this sort of timber to tourism? It's a really catchy alliteration. So I think it rings off the tongue well, and maybe that's why it's taken off so much. But the transitions in Bend's economy have been far more complex than just timber to tourism. And one of the ways that I think this sort of this myth got traction is looking at a graph like this. This is just, oh, the dates are cut off on the bottom. That's great. We'll just tell you that it starts sort of the 1960s and it goes by decade until we get to the 2020s. And the green bar represents the share of Bend's employment in the service economy. And this, is that blue? It's so washed out. We'll call it the bottom ones here. That's the share of our economy in goods producing businesses. Primarily at the time, wood product manufacturing as well as actual timber harvest itself. And you can see there's been this dramatic reduction in Bend's economy being reliant on goods producing jobs, as well as a corresponding increase in the share of our economy reliant on service, on the service sector. And that generally is, I think, where this notion of this timber to tourism transition happened. We get to this point now where almost 50% of Bend's economy are folks who are paid to provide a service as opposed to producing goods. Some pictures that Kelly would have talked about. Obviously, Old Mill District above us there. That is Shevlin Hickson. I don't know. I'm not going to butcher it. It's one of them. That's where the current Old Mill is, though. I know that for a fact. This transition's far more complex, though, than this idea of like, well, we did a lot of timber and wood products, and then we moved to tourism. And if we actually break out the components that exist within these two broad sectors, we find a much more interesting and I think dynamic story that exists behind the numbers. In the bottom here, in those goods producing numbers, this is now just 1990 to the early 2020s. And you can see manufacturing as a share of Bend's economy has really declined, really significantly. And that is mostly wood product manufacturing jobs that we've lost during that period of time, from 16% to 7% of our total job base in Bend in that manufacturing decline that we saw there. Construction, which we often think of as, Bend is a sort of a boom town, especially when it comes to construction. Construction's been pretty steady actually over the last almost 40 years. That's crazy to say that 1990 was almost 40 years ago, but we're there, people. Millennials, I just have to say this every time. Millennials turn 45 this year, and some of them are grandparents. It's possible. Do the math. Okay. Service providing, though. So let's drill down in the service sector a bit and see where the transition in the jobs that we've seen during that period of time. This is where I think the fascinating story is. Leisure and hospitality, this darkest green bar here, that represents the vast majority of our tourism jobs in our economy. That includes restaurants, hotels, recreational facilities, Mount Bachelor. All those jobs are sort of captured in the leisure and hospitality sector. 1990, 15% of our jobs were in leisure and hospitality. 2020s, 14%. Steady share of our economy over the last 30 plus years. So then how have we had this dramatic increase in the service sector? Where are all these jobs coming from? And that's where you see these top two bars. Healthcare grew from 8% of our jobs back in the early 90s to almost 20% today. So health services has blown up. And part of that is that Bend has grown, and so with more people, that means more demand for health services. Also means Bend is aging. An older population disproportionately demands health services. And then number three is Bend has become on the map as an epicenter for regional health services. So we have folks from Klamath Falls, the Columbia River Gorge, Eastern Oregon that come and receive services here in Central Oregon specifically, and we see that reflected in our healthcare concentration there. And then the top one I think is the coolest story. and it doesn't look very exciting on the graph, I suppose, but professional and business services, which is a terrible catch-all industry. It includes all sorts of professional services. Everything people think of when they say the tech sector is mostly in professional and business services. That includes, computer-related jobs. That includes engineering, design, marketing. All of what we can talk about. Most of our outdoor recreational equipment producers aren't actually in manufacturing. Most of them are in professional business services, professional business services, because they're doing the design for those products. They're not actually doing the construction or manufacturing of those here in Bend. And what we see is that has doubled in its market share in the last 30 plus years. And that has been the big diversification of Bend's economy. Now, what's really fascinating about this is, if someone, I'm not going to poll the audience here because we'll get all sorts of crazy things, but oftentimes when you just have casual conversations about, what does Bend's economy look like? What are some sister cities that look like our economy? And oftentimes we hear, like Flagstaff, Arizona. Has anyone heard that one before? Maybe the Bozeman's or Missoula. Sometimes you'll get these folks who bring up like some of the mountain towns of Colorado. They'll be like Vail. And you're like, well, no, Vail is like legitimately just a ski town. Like that's all they do. The best comparison as far as industry composition that Bend is the most similar to, now not in size, but in industry composition, is San Diego, California. That is the closest industry composition of a metro area that of the 360 some odd metros that exist in the US right now. Which when you take a step back from that and think about it, it kind of makes sense. If anyone's ever been to San Diego, probably went because you were a tourist. Maybe you went to SeaWorld or you went to the zoo or whatever, or go sit on a beach. They also have this huge base there, military base, which we don't have a huge military base, but what we do have is this huge national forest right next to us. And so federal employment and government employment is just a little bit higher than the average for metro areas, and not for different reasons. We have those concentrations. And then they have a really robust professional sector that exists there as well. So next time, that's your little trivia you could take away with it. We're very similar to San Diego, just without the 75 degrees year-round thing. I won't spend too much time on this, but despite the fact that our transition in the economy has been one of, hasn't just been timber to tourism, it is important to emphasize, like, tourism is a critical component of our economy. It has been something that has put us on the map. Honestly, we'll do show of hands for this one. How many people were first a tourist before moving to Bend? Okay, thank you for being honest. I appreciate the honesty. That's true. I mean, the vast majority. When I do this with audiences, it's 90% of folks raise their hands. And we are all meaningful contributors to our economy and to our community through being good neighbors, through paying taxes, through being part of the labor force, by spending money at local businesses. The ability of tourism to bring and sustain the growth that we've seen and create a robust economy is really impressive. And I often say, like, we got to give a lot of credit to tourism for putting us on the map for that transition to even take place. But if we look at the numbers, I mean, even today, and this is for Deschutes County specifically, but $1.2 billion in visitor spending annually. That number is up this year probably. Almost 11,000 jobs in the region and $64 million in tax revenue that supports local services through that through the visitors. And this isn't something new. People have been visiting Bend to be a tourist for a long time. The mode of recreation has shifted. People weren't mountain biking 75 years ago, but people still come here to have a good time. We have to talk a little bit or have a sincere conversation about the housing. Like I said, we weren't a Zoom town. And the reason why we weren't a Zoom town was likely because of housing availability and housing affordability. And this has become increasingly a problem here in Central Oregon and Bend specifically. If we look at the least affordable markets, that's not necessarily a list you want to talk about, but the least affordable markets in the state of Oregon by county, we see that Deschutes County is the second least affordable county in the entire state. And I'm measuring this by the number of the years of the average wage in that community to equal the average home price. And the reason why I quantify housing affordability that way is it's really critical to talk about housing affordability in the context of what the jobs will support for the housing market. And we have a bit of a disconnect here because we have folks who bring jobs from elsewhere. We have folks who are retirees who bring more wages or other assets that can sort of balloon the housing prices a bit. Hood River is the only place that is worse than us. So I don't know if that's good company, bad company. I don't know how to sort of classify that one. But housing affordability is a distinct issue for us here, especially when it comes to economic development, trying to recruit businesses to come to this region to help diversify the economy even further. When we get pushed up against the wage constraint, the wages that they'd have to pay their employees in order to make it pencil for them, that is often one of the biggest hurdles we hear from site selectors when they're looking at the Bend market. And we also have to, acknowledge the fact that there's a huge component of our economy that we just talked about, the service sector tied to tourism, where these tend to be lower wage jobs, but are so critical for helping us recreate in this place we call home, helping to put this place on the map to sort of grow it further and diversify the economy further. And yet those are the folks who are pinched the hardest when it comes to this housing affordability issue that we're seeing. We're going to hear some solutions in a sec from the city of Bend, which we'll get there. And I think there's a lot of progress that we're making in this area, and a lot of the realities of Bend's housing constraint are not a Bend problem. They are a state policy problem that we have, and Bend is a very acute example of the problem with that policy. Most cities in the state don't really care about our land use or zoning laws to the extent that it's been a problem here in Bend, and I think Brian will probably get into that a little bit. So has anyone ever seen this logo here at the bottom? It's the Bend emblem? Yeah, we've all seen it, right? You probably have a sticker on your car. I'm not going to ask for show of hands with that one, but I guarantee at least 7 of you do. I know it. So the Bend Emblem Club was created over 100 years ago, and it was a group of it kind of sounds a little frat bro-y from the way Kelly describes it, but a group of business entrepreneurs in Bend who were trying to put Bend on the map in the 19-teens. And they had this goal. I love their motto, and I think we should all just bring this back, which is, here's to everybody everywhere who's trying to be brave, to be honest, to be kind, and to be cheerful. What an awesome slogan. So that's great. So let's ignore the fact that they were kind of like this guys-only bro group, but they had a great slogan. Their goal, though, like I said, was to put Bend on the map. And at the time, they created this cool emblem that now we all get to use and put on our bumper stickers. And their goal was to try to get Bend to be a city of 100,000. And they thought that they would get there sometime in the late 1920s. I think Kelly always says it's somewhere around 1930 is where they thought we'd get there. We didn't actually look at the raw number of people that live in Bend. We have exceeded 100,000, but they were almost exactly 100 years off on their projections. So cheers to them for their goal. They finally made it. And you all helped contribute to us getting to that goal of 100,000. But regardless of the number of 100,000, I think it's important to leave with this notion that, like, what it means to be Bend, this is an intentional community. And for many, many years, people have chosen to live here. And because of that, we have so much more civic engagement than I've seen in other communities that I engage with across the state of Oregon. And it's a privilege to live here and call this place home myself. With that, I'm going to bring up Brian Rankin, who is with the city of Bend. He's a long-term planner with them. You're going to hear some fun, exciting stories about land use and planning. Yeah.
My name is Brian Rankin. I am a senior strategist with the city of Bend. And I work with, you'll see some of my coworkers next to the food. They're in there. We had our maps. We have a little cool, there's this little cool interactive map that you can have them check out. You can look at your address and look at what it looked like a few decades ago and then slide it. You can see today in the history. So when we're done, swamp them. I want 100 people in there asking to use this application. So today we're just going to talk about, so as I work for the city of Bend, we as a small group, our job is primarily to create long-range plans. And what does that mean? So I want to kind of explain this to you, kind of create a bridge between all the growth and all the change, and explain kind of the dynamics that are in play here in terms of managing the growth that you see today. And in addition, kind of turn to how what Damon mentioned, how the state influences how we plan locally. And then speak to an opportunity that we all have as residents and members of the Bend community to participate in creating a plan for the next 20 years. So that's why I'm here tonight. Not nearly as much colorful commentary or history, but so let's talk about our current growth strategy, because I'll tell you what I hear a lot, especially from, okay, I'll share a funny story here really quick. We're doing an event like this. Somebody comes up and they say, I've been here for 2 years. When are you going to stop the growth? I'm like, you're not seeing the irony of this, are you? Okay, anyway. But a lot of people have concerns that the growth is just, it's unmanaged, it's unregulated. The city has no idea what it's doing. They just, oh, those idiots, they don't have a plan. I'm like, wow, come on into my office. We'll spend an hour or two and I'll show you the stack of plans that we have. So let's talk about the current growth strategy. So what I'm doing is saving you hours of time and reading thousands of pages of plans. So first of all, we're in Oregon. And Oregon has a very unique system of regulating how cities are built, how we're planning, and essentially how our form and function over time. In Oregon statewide planning, there are state laws and there are administrative rules, and they tell cities how essentially to plan. It's a set of regulations. And so my job as a staff planner, serving a city councilor that you will have up on the stage here soon enough, is say, okay, folks, hey, we have these rules and these laws and we have to abide by them, but let's all come together and figure out how we're gonna manage our growth and make these decisions that guide our future. And we're all cool as long as we stay within these boundaries. One of the big features of this, just to simplify it, is around the urban growth boundary. So the urban growth boundary is essentially a line. It's imaginary but very real that's drawn around each city. And within that urban growth boundary, you can do urban things. You can have subdivisions, you can have businesses, you can have college campuses, you can do intensive uses. That's where we have our water systems, sewer systems, and more density. Once you're outside of that urban growth boundary, that land is intended to be more or less preserved or reserved for rural uses. So you've seen this a million times, either when you're flying into Bend or flying into Central Oregon or anywhere in Oregon. Typically, it's like you see a whole bunch of nothing, and then it's like, boom, you're in the city. That's the urban growth boundary. And so urban growth boundaries are designed to have years and years worth of development potential to create a supply of land for future residents and to create jobs and support the economy through changing times. So that's kind of Oregon's. That's a very simplified version of Oregon land use planning. We have a comprehensive plan that was created by a number of Bendites and a city council in 2016. It was the last kind of big update to our comprehensive plan. It is what's been guiding growth for the last decade. And if I'm just to kind of sum it up, it's like we're gonna wisely grow out with complete communities, and we're also gonna grow up. So it's a little bit of redevelopment and densification in the core of the city. And it's also expansion of that urban growth boundary to provide more capacity for homes and businesses, parks, and schools over time. So it's a little bit of both strategies, not all one, not all the other. But importantly, it's not just about land use, it's also about infrastructure. So the city's job is to help plan for, build, construct infrastructure. And so we have a transportation plan that looks ahead 20 years. And it says this is our plan to provide transportation services as well as programs and projects and all the improvements we need in our transportation system out to the year 2040. We also have, it's not really fun, but it's a wastewater conveyance plan. It's like we use gravity in Bend. That's the big emphasis in Bend is using essentially gravity because it's free. Once you build those pipes, it uses less energy. And using less energy creates fewer GHGs, and it's also cheaper in the long run. We have two sources of water in Bend, one surface water, a surface water source, and we have groundwater sources. What we know is we have sufficient supplies for, say, the next 10 or 15 years at current usage rates, and we know we're gonna have to conserve more and more and more in the future as we grow. And we also have a whole variety of codes and ordinances and programs to essentially line up to the policy. So if you can see, there's a hierarchy. The state has its requirements. We have a plan called the Comprehensive Plan that meets those requirements, created by locals, approved by a city council, and then a whole bunch of other plans to align to that land use plan, and then codes to get there and achieve that vision over 20 years. So what are some examples of these policies? Oh, we didn't get the animations. Cool. All right, we're going right to it. Do you remember that old picture of the old mill district? Well, there was a gentleman named Bill Smith, and he was a private landowner. He owned that place, and he inherited essentially an old mill site. It was in the 90s, it was shut down. You could bike through there. It was an old industrial site. And he said, you know what? I have a vision for this that is different than an industrial site in the middle of town. I want you to all imagine that for a second. If that was just an old industrial site, it'd be quite a different community. And he said, I am going to change the land use designation here. I'm going to get that approved by our city council, get that approved by the state, and that's what allowed that old mill to move from those old sites into this thing, this kind of beautiful vision that you see today. It took decades. So I think this is an example of how changing policy and with patience and time kind of creates a new place in Bend. And so keep that theme in mind. Again, no animations. I apologize. Would have been so much more effective. They just, for some reason, didn't show up. There was old industrial policy. How many folks are familiar with Colorado, Arizona couplet, with Crux? Have you been out to Crux? You've been to that area. That area was also zoned for industrial uses. For older Bendites and people who have been here, they can remember going to Spokamoto. They can remember basically a place that was fairly chill, industrial, kind of not much going on. And now in 2016, after a bunch of Bendites came together and decided that we wanted to create new mixed use areas in Bend, they changed the land use designation. It ended up on a map. And over time, with incentives, with patience, the developer came in, said, okay, I'm going to build to that new policy vision. And you can see that taking shape right off of Arizona. Let's see, where are we going now? Hello. There we go, hit it hard. Now, the other piece is on the expansion of our urban growth boundary. The expansion of the urban growth boundary carries with it similar dynamics. When you expand an urban growth boundary, you're expanding it typically into rural land. It is, for the most part, these are single unit homes that are on a big piece of land. We move the urban growth boundary to include those properties. And then over years, a developer will acquire them. And then they build according to the plan that the city has established back in 2016, which is, in this case, out in the northeast of town looking west. This is out at Petrosa. I don't know if you've seen that or driven by that. You're now seeing a variety of housing types. It takes years and years for those to fill in, and we're still waiting for the commercial center to be built out there as well, because that is planned. And what that will create in that area will be a more complete neighborhood than was there prior, because a lot of that area was missing commercial. So we're waiting for that to happen. It takes time for that to evolve. So what does it take to turn a plan into reality? Well, first of all, it takes a little bit of time and it takes energy. So first and foremost, this is a picture of what's called Bend Central District. In 2016, the city established essentially a new plan that said in the core of the city, north of Franklin, basically north of Franklin, and then south of Revere, and kind of along 3rd Street, that is going to be a vital mixed use area. And as you can tell, if you drive down there now, you go, no, that's not really what you see today. It takes time for these big changes to take place. But what ends up happening to help it along are city council and other decision makers and other agency folks. They're making investments in this area to help move that area along to create that policy vision. So this is looking west down Hawthorne. If you can imagine someday a pedestrian bridge, I think it should be constructed in a number of years, ideally. We're hoping, we're crossing our fingers. So a pedestrian bridge to connect to east and west and go over the railroad tracks, and as well as the parkway. And also improvements on Greenwood, improvements on Franklin, all designed to like help people use their bikes, walk around, make it easier to walk and bike. Why? Because that's the kind of investment that you need in order to encourage folks to build a taller mixed-use building. You have to make these investments over time in order to encourage a private market to do its thing to achieve the public's policy vision. This is essentially looking eastward over Caldera High School. And this is another example of the city working, in this case, with parks, and working with parks and our other partnering agencies, the library district, for example, to make investments in the southeast part of town in order to provide more amenities for the southeast part of town, as well as over time to encourage the development of a UGB expansion area that occurred down in the southeast. The city has also been investing in sewage systems in order to create pump stations and get the sewage out of there, because this was a big improvement necessary in order to serve a number of properties, but no one property could actually pay for that. And so by the city making these investments, it clears the way to produce more jobs and more housing in this area, and all in service of meeting the state's objectives of providing at least needed housing and more economic development opportunities within our urban growth boundary as required by law. We now also invest in our infrastructure systems. When you go home and flush, if you're on the city's systems, it goes here to our wastewater treatment plant. Not exciting stuff, but at the same time, extremely necessary. All of the plans that we have for our infrastructure, water, sewer, transportation, all of these have 20-year plans that are matching our land use plans. So we have a land use plan, a certain number of jobs, housing units, population growth is accommodated, and job growth is accommodated. We know where that's generally going to be, and then we size our plans for all of our systems to match that. Then we have lists of projects and investments, and those investments get built over time. So we keep our plans updated on a 5-year cycle to make sure that these plans are up to date and can take into consideration changes and things that are occurring now, and as well as things we anticipate in the future. Another big piece of infrastructure is around transportation. In 2020, after the passage of our land use plan in 2016, a group of people came together to work with our city council and recommend a new plan for our transportation system. That plan was adopted, and it looks out to the year 2040. And it's essentially a large list of projects that we need to build to accommodate growth, new programs, and it has its own policies, objectives. And what you'll notice are a lot of improvements with a focus on more bicycle and pedestrian and transit-oriented kind of improvements. The reason is that a lot of those types of improvements were essentially not funded for a long time, so there's catching up to do. The other piece is that this kind of improvement strategy helps reduce reliance on the automobile over time. So as we make more investments in these alternative modes, it is possible for people to make another choice. And also it complements some of the land use strategies in the core of the city in order to encourage people to not have to use a car all the time. We're not saying that you're not going to drive. We're not saying you're not going to use your vehicle. It's just that, do you have another option? Do you have a safer option? And then there are people as well that need to have these safer options because they don't have access to a vehicle. But this is an example of what you see on Wilson Street and 3rd. You'll see the green paint, you'll see separated bike lanes and protected bike lanes in order to help encourage people to use a mode other than having to drive all the time in Bend. So what's changed since 2016? We have 2 big new changes at the state level that will affect Bend as we plan for the future. So the first on the left is climate-friendly and equitable communities. This is a set of rules that the Department of Land Conservation and Development adopted and passed that apply to cities. Department of Land Conservation and Development is the agency that has to essentially approve all of our long-range plans going forward. So we do our best job to meet state law. Our city council approves that plan, and we send it to the state for their approval. In this case, it essentially is driving more densification, creating climate-friendly areas, which will accommodate more housing and more economic development opportunities over time, all in service of reducing our energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. And in addition, we have the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. That is a law that was passed that provides us, as Bendites, a target. We have to plan for 33,000 new dwelling units in the next 20 years. And those are going to be a certain type of dwelling unit, and also they're at certain affordability levels. So these requirements then present us with the opportunity to figure out how and where to accommodate that kind of growth in Bend, either a little bit of redevelopment or expansion. And we do that through additional engagement. There's more of a focus on getting out into the community rather than expecting people to come down to City Hall, to bring people into this planning process a little more organically, rather than having you sit through a bunch of fairly boring meetings down at City Hall chambers. So we're trying to get out on the street to get your ideas and your opinions and your thoughts on how to meet these requirements over time as we do our next planning effort. And so how's this work going to get done when we do our next 20-year plan? We are essentially going to be planning for housing. We are going to be planning for economic development to meet our 20-year housing need, our 20-year economic development land needs. We're going to be planning for our transportation system, how to reach our state targets in terms of housing, how to keep our economy vital and diversified as we grow, and also how we're going to plan our transportation system to meet the state's requirements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the next 20 years and beyond. And ultimately to do so in a way that, it needs to bring us together. And all this work, and something I haven't mentioned, is that it's always Bendites, it's always people getting involved that bring this work together. Little ideas, big ideas, people coming into the process to help shape this plan, and then that shapes our community, and it binds us from the past that Damon talked about all the way into where we are today to address our current needs, and then to create a bridge to the next 20 years for essentially creating a plan for the community that our kids and our grandkids are going to inherit. So with that, we'll be here for questions. And
Well, thank you. That was a monstrous subject to try to get your hands around. And actually, I'd like you to stay up. We're going to do a panel tonight. And we have a couple great, in addition to Brian, come on up. You're not out of the hot seat yet. And we're also joined by, who do we have? We have Mike Riley. He's a city council, City of Bend. And we've got Rachel Coton, who's the park planner for Bend Park and Rec District. So thank you guys for coming tonight. We've got some questions, and actually, if we could advance the slide, we have a phone number up there that if you have any questions you want to talk about tonight, I'll try to address them in real time. So go ahead and send that our way. I've got a few questions to get going, and then I'd love to, if there's any subjects that you want to talk about tonight, just go ahead and address that. But I guess I'm going to start with the question of, why is growth not accidental, and what does it mean to grow with intention?
How do we protect what we love about this place from the physical environment and the community sense and feel of it and the neighborhood feel? And for me, where I live, having to have services not too far away that I can walk to, how do I get that in other parts of the community? How do we bring that into the rest of the community? So it's really about, that character and natural environment, the friendliness part, the walkability, the kind of small town feel. There was something today's called Envision Bend. It was called Bend 20, 30 years ago. That small town feel was really important to the people of Bend when that was created. How do we keep that alive in our community today? It's not easy to do any of those things, as I've learned in a variety of ways, including serving on the council, but those are some of the things that I think about. But also just being forward-looking. Like, I need to be thinking about my kids, and how can I ensure that they could afford to move here?
Yeah, my
Move back
my
here, I
daughter's walking out right now.
Yeah, I'm out of here. See you, Dad.
No, and I put a lot of thought to that as well. What is this community? Where do I want it in 20 years, and what is it going to look like for my children? But Rachel, why don't we jump in with you here? Brian was talking about complete communities, and for a lot of people in the room that may not understand this, the Bend Park and Rec District is a district of its own, so maybe address that a little bit. But how is the Park District part of the overall package that creates a quote-unquote complete community in the planning process?
Hi, I'm Rachel Colton. I'm a park planner with Bend Park and Rec. And I just want to say, I was thinking about what Brian was saying, and we're thinking intentionally and we're planning intentionally. As planners, one of the things that we talk about is to go slow to go fast, right? It takes a lot of time to do these long-range plans, but it is so important to know where we want to go and set up a framework for how we want to get there. And so that's kind of one of the ways that we approach it. And we are, as you mentioned, Brian, we're a special district distinct from the city of Bend. And so, if you own property within the city of Bend, you will see a distinct line on your property tax bill that goes to Bend Park and Rec, and to ensure that we have facilities that meet the needs of everyone that is here, and then everyone that is coming as well. And in addition to the comprehensive plan that the city has, we certainly partner closely with them. We have our own comprehensive plan. So we did a full update similar to the city in 2018 of our comprehensive plan, and we also did a midterm update in 2024 to update our project list and really ensure. One of the things that we look about that I hope you can take away from the presentation tonight is we look at things called level of service. When you come here, you see what we have, and you expect that that's going to continue, right? And anyone that moves here says, wow, there's 84 parks now, that's going to continue to grow, right? And so we have certain acres of parks per person that we try to hit, both our neighborhood parks and our community parks, as well as our regional parks. And we also have trail mileage that we try to hit per person. And one of the newest things that we've introduced that I particularly like, as it's more equity distributed, is looking at walk sheds. So we look, and our goal right now is to have 100% of residential units within Bend within a half mile of a safe walk shed. We're talking about kids, so like, I don't think a child should need to cross 3rd Street by themselves to get to a park. So within a safe walk shed of a park. And I can tell you that back when we last looked at this in 2024, about 2/3, 65% of people were within that walk shed. And so everything we do with our comprehensive plan, we look at in partnership with our colleagues at the city and other special districts, like the school district. There's numerous special districts, the library district, the rural fire district. There are numerous districts throughout the city that we partner with. And our partnership with the city has been instrumental. One of the things that we did as part of our most recent comprehensive plan update was Brian mentioned, we call it the core area or Bend Central District. They're looking to grow, have thousands of residential units there, and we know they're going to need new parks and trails. So we created 2 new what we call park search areas, where we want more parks, whether it's plazas or parks or open spaces to serve those new areas. So I like to think we kind of nest, though we're a special district, we nest in with our partners both at the city and other special districts to collectively meet the needs of our community.
Yeah, thank you very much. So Brian, why don't we jump over to you? So what I hear a lot of is, why can't we stop the growth? Why, it's all too much. I don't want to grow for growth's sake. How do you respond to that, and what is your role and duty over at the city to respond to the negative effects of growth along with the positive ones? And can you say no to growth?
We can say no. Very simple question. Very difficult answer. If growth does not comply essentially with the city's policies and codes, the city can say no to growth. Essentially, but that's on a site-by-site level. I think the bigger question you're asking is, why can't we just make it stop? Why can't we make it stop?
Yeah, stop the madness.
Yeah, we're going to stop the growth. We're going to stop doing that. So presumably there are people that want that to happen, and a lot of people approach me, why can't we just make it stop? And I would say, well, we have legal requirements to plan for growth. Part of the Oregon land use planning system, as I understand it, when it was established, was that cities were the place for growth and change. And that growth would take place through redevelopment, densification, and expansion of your urban growth boundary. And the trade-off is that then the rural areas are more rural. So you're keeping the rural places rural and the cities become cities. That is essentially a simplified version of Oregon land use planning. Part of that is that the state, it provides us and gives us an estimate. It says, you, City of Bend, you are on the hook to go plan for 33,000 new dwelling units in the next 20 years. You must. If we don't, then the state can take action against the city. It can say, you're out of compliance with our laws, and they're going to put us in land use jail. I'm going to be in like Salem somewhere down there. It'd be the weirdest, planner jail. I kind of want to see what planner jail is like, honestly. But a lot of paperwork. Yeah. But the point is, it's the law to accommodate this growth. And so it's a tension. I understand it. I guess my point is, I understand it. I think we all have our ideal year. When you moved here, we all have our ideal year when Bend was awesome. And then it just somehow, for some people, it just got worse. I try to keep it like it's getting better. It's different. It's better. I have a coworker, she says, growth is like aging. It's like nobody really wants to admit it, but you got to kind of embrace it. And if you don't, what'd she say? If you don't, you're either going to spend a lot of money to try to reverse the effects of it, or you're going to be unhappy. It's the law. And so I think that can sound disempowering in a way, but I think it's empowering. It's like, look, folks, we're in this together. We get to figure out how to create a plan to accommodate that growth. It doesn't mean it's just rampant growth. It's purposeful. It's intentional. There will be places of change. There will be places that are stable. And so for us to come together as a community and figure out where those areas of change and why, what's the intention, and ultimately create a plan that we can agree with as much as we can, and that meets the state's approval.
I'd also add, I don't know if it would be as interesting of a community to live in if there wasn't some growth and change. I mean, I think it becomes stagnant, and I don't think that that's a place necessarily that's exciting and interesting to live, attracts young people to stay, to come back, all that sort of stuff. So, you know, we probably wouldn't have this campus here, for example. There's a lot of things we wouldn't have in our community if we weren't growing and changing some. I mean, we can argue over the pace and all those sorts of things and the how, and that's what Brian's getting at. We can really shape that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, any of you could jump in on this. What are the perhaps biggest points of miscommunication or frustration that people have with the plan and where it's been going and how it's being done? You know, what's the hot button issue that you feel that bubbles up, that rises up over and over again, that you would love to be able to you know, speak into a little bit?
I've got one. This is one I took some notes on. So you've heard that mention of complete communities from Brian, and I think, and a little bit about how they build out. So we're having some concerns that I think are valid concerns in parts of the community right now in two areas that have been master planned. One is in the northeast part of town, the Petrosa development. During the last UGB, we called it the perfect rectangle before we brought that in. And then in the southeast, it was called the Elbow. It's the southeast area plan down there near Knott Landfill and that whole big area there to the west of 27th Street and the north of Knott Road. And what's happening there is, you know, we set the table as the city, right? We do all the planning for it and say what can happen where, and we generally need this many housing units and this many jobs created and that kind of stuff. And we want to see, ideally, a complete community that has enough commercial services to really support people so that folks don't have to walk as far to go get a coffee or to get some kind of service, or, you know, ideally, what you hear a lot is the grocery store right nearby. And what's happening right now is, people are concerned about when are we going to get that? And the issue for us as the city and the planners and the council members is we set the stage and we provide the infrastructure and we do the zoning and we try to come up with incentives to attract, you know, the housing needed and the jobs needed and that kind of thing. But we don't build stuff. We're in an economy where the private sector does that. And so in those parts of town, what you hear from the developers is that it takes anywhere from 10 to 20 years before you have enough, they'll use the term heads, people living in the area to support, say, a grocery store. The challenge is that when people see it on the map with a commercial zone, they think it's going to happen, and they come to us and say, you didn't do it. You didn't follow through on the vision. I've lived here since before Northwest Crossing was being talked about when I first moved here, and then I watched the planning of it. Even they don't have a grocery store out there, and it's really only been in the last 3 to 5 years that you've really had a vibrant commercial center there. For a long time, that developer was significantly subsidizing the rents of the commercial businesses to try to get some there. So it really does take time. We can't force developers to come in and build that grocery store. That's not how our system works, and it would raise a whole set of like cost issues as well. The other challenge that's going on is that now under state law, because of the push for housing, broadly speaking, that I support as a council and our council supports, doing a lot more to really focus on building more so we have more supply at all income levels. Some parts of the commercial land now can be used for affordable housing. So we have two chunks, I think they're roughly 10 acres each in the northeast and the southeast, that are just going through a process right now where they are getting approval and some subsidy to produce housing units for people making at 60% of the area median income and below. Those are really hard projects to build. They require huge amounts of subsidies, and bring them into our community is really important to meet the housing needs of everyone in our community, including the service workers that Damon was referring to earlier. But they eat up some of that commercial land. So if you have to wait 10 to 15 years before you have enough heads to build the grocery store, but there's no more land to build the grocery store because it got taken up by housing, there's these conundrums that go on that are just hard to explain to everybody and hard for us to manage our way through. So some of it's the complexity of the system and getting people to sit down and learn a little bit more about how it works as a whole. Because I think I understand everybody. We want it to be easy and simple, but it's honestly not. And there's a lot of intentional planning, but it takes time for those things to show fruition in the community. And I do think Northwest Crossing is a really good example of that.
Yeah, that's yeah, a lot of good things there. Rachel, why don't you jump in on this one? What's perhaps like, let's tell a story so that we can see it in our minds. What's perhaps one of the best examples of the integration between the Parks District with the city or with the county, where it really came together well, and perhaps another place where it didn't quite come together through planning or circumstance that you'd love to see improved? Do you have any case studies that you would love to kind of shine light on?
Yeah, I've got a couple. I mean, one of the ones I was kind of mentioning to Brian when we were kind of kicking off today was, we have, I mean, we are separate agencies, right? But in a perfect world, you all don't see the difference in the lines, right? It shouldn't matter if, you're getting a park from one person, or a trail is the best example I have. We have an intergovernmental agreement with the city for over 100 miles of trail maintenance. You all don't know who maintains what trails, and that's okay. You shouldn't have to know, because if you want to know, it means you're calling one of us because something's not plowed, or there's a crack in the sidewalk, or something of that nature. And that intergovernmental agreement was updated a couple of years ago, and I think it's a great partnership with the city to provide services to you all. And so I think that is an area where I'm grateful that you don't understand that we are, distinct from the city, because it means we're doing our job. Um, we've been really fortunate. I feel like we have a good partnership with the city on long range planning. One of the things I'm excited that we're talking about right now, and I think we can share it is going slow to go fast, right? And sometimes like you wish things would happen sooner, right? We're really excited about the Coria as well, and we can't wait to start working with the city to figure out where's a park and a plaza going to go, because we know there's going to be thousands of units there. And so I think we probably struggle with some of the same things the community does. Like, I want something now. Like, I don't want to just plan it and wait, but I think that's something that I need to accept myself. And I hope that you all, after this presentation, will understand, like, we need to do these long range plans and figure out where we're going into that framework, and that can take a long time, but ultimately it will get us where we want to go. And I think it's also then the call to action to the great work that Brian's doing, and we have surveys going out all the time, and we'll be updating our river plan and things of that nature. Is please participate. And we're so fortunate here in Bend. I just put out an RFP for a perception survey, and everybody was saying, wow, you get that many responses, your community really cares. And so thank you for caring, and please continue to care and participate, because that's what makes a community what it is.
Yeah, I think tonight's a perfect example of a community that cares. Thank you for being here. So a reminder, if you have any questions, burn a hole in your pocket, send it to Garrett, and he'll forward it to me. But Garrett, feel free to send those questions if you've got any. But let's talk about housing affordability. That's a sore subject for a lot of people, and they're saying it's somebody's fault, right? It's the greedy developers or the builders, or it's the city not providing enough land or not providing enough infrastructure. What's the culprit? What's the main culprit for housing affordability? I know it's not a unique challenge in Bend, but what are the primary forces at play that make housing affordability such a big issue here in Central Oregon?
What's the single culprit?
So
High demand.
That was the setup.
High demand.
High demand.
I mean, so within any city, there's no city, I think, anywhere in the country that can sustain. You saw the growth charts, right? You saw what happened in the 90s in particular. I mean, so it's a function of there's high demand, of course, to be here. Some people would look at the state system and say urban growth boundaries create limited supplies, inherently create a limited supply. You can probably make a pretty good argument for that. There are studies that show that where housing markets are more elastic, right, where you have the ability, a developer has the ability to just go build a subdivision and not pull permits and just go build something, yeah, the prices tend to be lower in some of these areas. But do we want that? So that's another kind of public question. So you can blame the state, you can blame the city. I think all I know is that the city, since I have been here and working in this, has consistently been paying attention to how much land that we are able to provide within our urban growth boundary for the purpose of housing. There are lots of debates as to whether that should be a certain kind of housing, maybe more dense housing, duplexes, triplexes, like in that form, or multi-unit housing, or single unit detached housing. There are people that play with that, and they say, well, Bend is a single unit detached community, and that's what we need to do. And other people say, but that's not affordable, because the average price is what, $790 now. I mean, Brian will know better than me, but it's so unapproachable for your average Bendite to afford that. And so part of the strategy on the part of the city of Bend, it's a multi-tiered, multi-pronged strategy, and Councilor Riley can definitely chime in here too. We have adjusted our development codes over and over and over again to make it easier to build a wider variety of housing types on existing land. We go through our permitting processes to try to simplify those. Um, People could blame high fees, our fees, but our fees in our planning department. However, our planning department is not subsidized by outside sources, so we have to charge developers for that because we're not charging taxpayers for that. We have our infrastructure. Infrastructure is paid for in Bend primarily through ratepayers. So we could build, if ratepayers wanted to say, you know what, triple our water bill. Who wants to triple their water bill here? Nobody, right? I think all of us are like, whoa, that summer was kind of brutal on the bank account. So all of us pay for the infrastructure that we put in. So if we are to create cheaper infrastructure to lower the cost to develop a housing project, that's borne by the people of Bend. So there's another policy question. So I think it's a lot of different factors. There is no one factor, but I rest assured the city council in particular, more so than any other council that I have worked with, is focused on housing production, housing affordability, and they are turning over every stone they possibly can to try to create those opportunities. But we are fighting against incredible demand from people that are moving primarily from outside of the community with the wealth to come in and buy a house. So there's essentially out competing people that are local residents working on local wages. And that's what that's this country, right? This is where we live in this country, and this is what you can do. So we can't build a wall here. An urban growth boundary is not a wall. It does not prevent people from moving in. And I'm not saying it should either. I'm just saying that that's a really deep question where you could have housing economists debate all night and they'll tell me I'm wrong about everything I just said.
What gives you a case for optimism? And what's your hope for Bend in the next 20 years?
I mean, one thing I think that I just would echo what Brian said. I really do think that this council, myself included, is very focused on housing and how do we provide housing for people at all ends of the spectrum. And that really is something we haven't spoken at all about tonight, and can talk about it one-on-one with people. But the folks who are experiencing houselessness, all the way up to high-end, high-end market rate homes. I mean, we do have to provide, and the state's requiring us to do that. And in this one of the new versions of the law that Brian's talking about, we're going to be required to be able to show how we're going to produce homes, certain number of homes in each of these different kind of categories of based on income, who would be able to afford to live in those homes. From an optimism perspective, I think, the council is very focused on the affordability stuff. We've experimented with a lot of tools. I think we're very willing and open to experimenting with more tools to see how we can do that and make sure that we're, in particular, the parts that are harder to build, which is the stuff, the middle income. You'll hear that term between people who make 80% of the area median income, or AMI, up to 120% of that, firefighters, teachers, starting out police officers, those kind of folks. And then the lower ends of the spectrum, because that is the hardest part to build. I'm optimistic because since I have lived here, this community has changed in so many positive ways. And, there's downsides to growth. I mean, I sit at intersections and get worked up when I have to sit there for 20 seconds. Compared to Portland or somewhere else, I have to remind myself, deep breath, Mike, it's all okay. But I mean, seriously, this community has evolved and changed in so many positive ways. And that is in part because of the growth and the change that's happened. And it's in part because so many people like yourselves show up, care about this place, and help us make good decisions, whether it's me or whoever sits on the Bend City Council, the Planning Commission, the Park District Board. You have people engage and help us make good decisions and bring us good ideas. So I'm optimistic about that. I think we're also pretty much a can-do community. That's something when I first moved here. I moved here in 1997. It sort of struck me really quickly. This is a place where people like to get shit done, like let's get it done. And I think that has enabled us to just make things happen. I mean, if this campus is not an example of a get shit done place. This used to be a landfill, for goodness sakes. Look at what's happening here. So that gives me a lot of optimism. And then we just have a great place, right? Central Oregon's a great place. So it's hard not to be optimistic about the glorious day we had today.
Going to echo, I mean, you all are what gives me hope and makes me optimistic because you care. And we do have, I've worked in government agencies in other states. We have so much engagement here, and I can't tell you how important that is. So please continue to be engaged. And I think we also have a populace who recognizes, as I do, as we all do, housing is really important and lots of things are important, right? And we appreciate that you're thinking about all those things and that the city does as well. We partner on the planning process. I know they partner with the other districts as well, which is appreciated because collectively we need to do this together and we need to think about all the elements. You know, we spoke about complete communities. We need to think about all those things so this can continue to be the place that you wanted to move to. So think about why you moved to Bend and what you cared about when you moved to Bend, and let's all work together to try as we grow and change. It's going to change. And so we might change, like, you know, we've talked about the core area, Central District. Our average neighborhood park size is 4 to 6 acres. We're not building 4 to 6 acre parks in the Central District. All the lots are quite small. So we know that we need to evolve and change too to meet our community's needs. And we look to you all to help us understand what that might look like in the Central District.
It's the human capital. It's all of us. I mean, I don't feel depressed about the future. I mean, personally, and about Ben's future. I mean, remember what Damon shared with us. I mean, we as Bendites, and Bend has survived and thrived despite these challenges that we faced at different points in our history. And we'll have new challenges, and as long as we can come together and work it out together and draw the most and the best out of each other, then I think we can tackle the problems that we're facing. I think it's pretty simple. It's the people.
And can I just add one thing? So, and in particular in this time when, and I'm going to get political on you here, sorry. When our president is saying he doesn't want to pay government workers who are furloughed, right? They have to show up and do their job anyway. That's a little bizarre to me. We have incredible people who work in local government and are public servants in our community. And I think Rachel and Brian are 2 examples of that. And I just, you know, I think it is impressive the quality of people who work here and they're dedicated to this community and helping shape its future in a positive way. Sure, they don't do everything right all the time. Well, so what else is new? We're all human, right? But, and we have challenging systems to work in. But I just want to share that with you in this time right now when we, you know, we have a lot of people who work for the public good in government jobs at all levels, and we have tremendous talent in our community that's part of that human capital that both Rachel and Brian are referring to.
Yeah, I think we could probably put a bow on the evening with those amazing comments of all of you. So thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Brian. The longer that I spend in Bend, the more I realize that behind every sore subject and problem, there's a neighbor, a friend, a community member that's working really hard to solve it. And if you've got opinions, make them heard, get involved, but know that we're trying to do this together. So I want to thank you. Sincere thank you for showing up tonight, becoming more engaged citizens. And you got a little bit of a taste of the history, and because I'm holding a microphone at the university, or Oregon State University, I give you the one continuing education credit. I'm an adjunct professor now. But if you want a deeper dive on this subject, the Chamber's is going to have a deep dive at What's Brewing, Visionary Growth at 5 p.m. on October 29th at the Deschutes Brewery Mountain Room. That's that fun one that looks out west and you get to smell the hops while you have a meeting. We've got a QR code for that right there. For anyone that wants to learn more, we have Bend, the growth management and planning folks and Bend Parks in the room over there. And let me see here. The Chamber Impact Conference is now open for registration November 19th. So once again, thank you for joining us. And we've got a walk-off movie, another amazing piece from Brian Niles. But thanks for joining us tonight. Take care.